Our next speaker is Marcella Piper-Terry. Marcella is the founder of vaxtruth.org, an organization dedicated to educating individuals about the truth behind vaccines, environmental toxins, autism, and other neurodevelopmental disabilities, and the reality of vaccine injuries. Marcella holds a Master's of Science degree from the University of South Alabama, where she was named Outstanding Graduate Student in Psychology. Marcy's master thesis, Increasing Risk Perception for HIV Infection in Heterosexual College Students, received the American Psychological Foundation's Graduate Research Scholarship Award in 1997, where she was one of 10 graduate students nationally to be recognized by the APF for excellence in research. Her experience includes community mental health, where she provided individual and family therapy and performed psychological evaluation for adults with developmental disabilities and psychiatric disorders, as well as conducting neuropsychological evaluation of children and adults with ADHD, learning disabilities, Asperger's syndrome, and autism, and as a provider of biomedical interventions. Marcella joins us from Evansville, Indiana.
Woo-hoo, Marcy!
Grab my notes and try to keep everything from blowing away here. I am so honored to be here. And I'm going to try not to cry. I was asked to be here today as the founder of VaxTruth. That's a new position for me. VaxTruth has only been in existence since August of 2011, so right about 6 months. VaxTruth came about and we were trying to combat misinformation in the media in Indiana about parents' rights to religious exemptions, which we have, thank God, in Indiana. I am, as Lori said, I am also here as a researcher. I'm an independent researcher with a Master of Science degree. My research was about increasing risk perception in adults, young adults and teenagers about the risk of HIV infection. Something I learned from that process is I learned a lot about the immune system. I also learned how important it is to be able to make an accurate risk-benefit analysis. In order to make an accurate risk-benefit analysis, you have to have accurate information. Your data has to be correct. That's one of the things we're going to talk about today. When you are determining whether or not to make changes in your behavior, in your health behaviors in particular, if your risk perception is too high, if you're too afraid, then it can lead to what's called learned helplessness. It can lead to a sense of, well, there's nothing I can do anyway, so why bother? If your risk perception is too low, if you don't have an accurate perception of the risks, then you're not likely to take the necessary steps to protect yourself. So risk-benefit analysis is extremely important when you're talking about health behaviors. I am also here today as the parent of a vaccine-injured child. And this is where I may cry, so you might have to forgive me on that. 2 years ago, my daughter suffered a near-fatal vaccine reaction. It was to one vaccine, well, 3 vaccines, 1 injection, the diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis vaccine. She had a history of adverse reactions to prior vaccinations, including neurological problems, liver problems, autoimmune disease, and seizures. We had previously made the decision not to vaccinate her further because we were so fearful about her health. When she got the DTaP vaccine 2 years ago, she had been bitten by a brown recluse spider, and she developed MRSA at the site of the bite. I had refused the vaccine twice in the emergency room, and ultimately I was talked into it by our family physician. I was afraid. as much as I know about vaccines and as much as I had written and researched about vaccines, and I knew my daughter's history, when I was faced with making that decision, that little voice of fear, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? And I went against my instincts. I didn't listen to that mommy voice that we talk about. 3 hours later, my daughter had a grand mal seizure. I was downstairs when I heard her hit the floor. She fell off the bed and she hit her head on the desk on the way down. I told my other daughter to call 911, and thank God we have an EMT that lives across the street from us, and we live in a very small town. So my neighbor was at my house within 30 seconds. And when she stopped breathing and her eyes rolled back in her head, he was there and he was able to resuscitate her. If I had lived in a bigger city, I don't think she would be alive. On our way to the hospital in the ambulance, I called my physician's office and I demanded that my daughter's reaction be reported to the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, otherwise known as VAERS. It was months later when I found out that that had not been done. When I called my physician's office and I said, I said, I want this reported. Why wasn't it reported? And the nurse said, well, did you bring her back here? I said, no, we were in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. And she said, well, it was the hospital's duty to report the injury. So I called the hospital. And they said, no, it was the administering physician's duty to report the injury. So I called VAERS. And I said, whose duty is it to report? And she said, well, either one should have reported it. I said, isn't it mandatory to report these severe injuries from vaccines? And she said, yes. And I said, so what kind of consequences are there for physicians who fail to report? She said, well, there are no consequences. I said, that's not mandatory. That's just a suggestion. That law needs to change. We cannot make accurate risk-benefit analyses if we do not have accurate data, period. Many of us here, most of us, I would venture to say here, are parents of children who've been injured by vaccines. Over the last several years, I've been involved in many conversations with parents who have lost children or have had children who were severely harmed by vaccines. During those conversations, there's a lot of guilt. In my case, there was a lot of guilt because I didn't trust my instincts. I didn't trust what I knew. So there was a lot of guilt, and there still is. What we often say to each other is, when we know better, we do better. That's a quote from Maya Angelou. And what it means is, you can't blame yourself for what you didn't know. But when you do know, you are incumbent. It is your responsibility to do better. Many of us did not start out to be in this camp that is called anti-vaccine. We have been pushed into this camp because our children have been harmed by vaccines. It was our belief, our unquestioning belief in the safety of vaccines that caused our children to be harmed and in some cases killed. When we know better, we do better.